I would first like to preface tonight's homily just a bit by letting you know that it's a bit of a heavy one. If you weren't already able to tell from the section that we are talking about tonight or from the questions that I gave you, it's going to be just a bit heavier than normal. So sorry if you were expecting a pep talk or something like that tonight. Unfortunately, that's not what I'm here to give you. But I do hope that you receive something significant from this. I pray that even with this heavy tone, that you leave here hearing the words of Jesus. Last week, Nathan spoke about the poor in spirit, and he used Eugene Peterson's words translated from the Message to try to give us a better understanding of what it means to be poor in spirit. And what he said is that being poor in spirit is to be at the end of your rope. Tonight, we'll be looking at those who mourn. And for me, it's been a bit difficult to define. But what I found, the way that I've found to define those who mourn is that those who mourn are those experiencing loss. Those who mourn are often those who are experiencing loss. Many of you have had an experience like me where you've lost a job. You've been fired from a job. It can be a very difficult experience, one where you mourn what could have been, where you try to deal with the questions, the fears, the struggles of wondering why. Parents often have a difficult time when their kids go off to college. They begin to mourn that relationship that they had that's bound to change. Or maybe their kids just start to move far away. Or maybe they just start to create distance from their kids without desiring that at all. Each of us have experienced the loss of a loved one, a friend, a family member, or a spouse. And it is a particularly difficult time and experience of mourning, because this type of mourning, this type of loss is one where they will never return to you. When Jesus sat on a hill and he began teaching about those who would be blessed, I doubt that many of those who sat and looked at him and were listening to him thought that they would be included on that list of those who are blessed. You see, Jesus was entirely surrounded by outcasts. Jesus closed his disciples. Some of them were fishermen. And to be a fisherman means that you had studied up when you were a kid, learning the Torah, and then you tried to follow a rabbi, and then no rabbi ended up choosing you. So you would go back and do the work of your father. His disciples were also tax collectors, who were the most hated people in their group because they had turned on their people and they had been traitors to the Roman government. His disciples were also extremists who carried little swords and daggers in the waistbands just in case they came across a Roman soldier and they think that they might get into a fight with their foreign occupiers. Those who followed around Jesus, they were also the sick. Just a chapter before, in chapter 4, it says this: "Now news about Jesus spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across Jordan followed him." And then also in Matthew chapter 8, what we find is that Jesus, immediately after finishing his Sermon on the Mount, he goes and he heals the mother of Peter, and then he heals a man who is demon-possessed, and then he heals a man of leprosy. All of these people who were sick, who were lame, who were outcasts were the ones who were following Jesus. In other words, as he went around the countryside teaching and healing and traveling, those who experienced loss, those who had experienced mourning, were those who followed him. The tax collectors had been shunned by their community. All those who followed Jesus were under some sort of Roman occupying rule, and they had lost their normal way of life. They were under the rule of oppressors. And for people who were sick or who were lepers, they weren't able to get the care that they needed, and often they were shunned by their families. Not always because their families didn't care about them, but often because their families could not take care of them. Because if their families tried to take care of them, they wouldn't be able to go in and worship and sacrifice in the temple. When Jesus looked around this crowd of outcasts, the sick, the lame, the oppressed, the mourning, what he said was, "How blessed are you?" As Nathan said last week, blessedness is not a feeling, but a status. When Jesus sat, he began to talk, and this is the way that I imagine it. He began to talk slowly, and he made eye contact with the people he saw, and he told them how blessed they were. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart, and blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. As he spoke these words, he made eye contact with the people around him, and he assured them that they were blessed. even though they didn't seem like they were, despite the fact that their condition suggested otherwise. I could probably sit here or stand here and try to think of 50 different reasons why the people around him, the people who were following him, these outcasts, were not the people who were actually blessed. When I look around, I see that the merciful often do not receive mercy. I see that the peacemakers are often misunderstood and turned on. And I see that for those who mourn, they are not able to find any meaning or any purpose or any answers to their pain. And it's at this point in the message, and usually this point in the message where, if I were reading this or, if I were listening to someone else preach this, usually it would come to something like this. You need to see the bigger picture. You see the blessing for the lowly. You might not see it right now, but it's going to come in the next life. It's not here on earth, but it's in heaven where blessedness is seen. And again, I go to Nathan's message last week where he gave us a great quote that told us about the kingdom of heaven. He said, "The kingdom of heaven stretches all the way to the ground." I'm reminded that the kingdom of heaven stretches all the way to the ground, that it's not in the next life where we begin to receive blessedness, but blessedness shows itself in this life as well as the next. There is an axiom that through my life I have found to be true, something that has just always been true, and I'm sure that those who in this room are older than me and who've lived life longer than me can hopefully attest to its truth as well, and it's this. There are fewer words more powerful than the words "me too." It's no surprise that those words were used by Tarana Burke on MySpace in 2006. It's no surprise that those words began to catch fire in 2017 as women began showing support for those who had experienced sexual harassment and sexual abuse. And it's poignant that today, on International Women's Day, that we make this point. That the words "me too" began to be used so that women could rally together, so that both men and women could rally together. Those who had been experiencing and those who had been under the oppression of sexual abuse were able to come together in bravery and declare that together they were survivors of sexual harassment and that the abused were not alone. Those two words were also the basis of one of the first sermons I ever gave. For some reason, someone thought it was a good idea to put a 19-year-old me in front of a room of 100 high schoolers. And so I went up there and just gave a very sad message. But I used these words, "me too," and talked about how important they were. This was back in 2014, and I was talking about my mom who had battled breast cancer. She had been battling breast cancer since around 2010, and after going through chemo and radiation and a mastectomy, she beat it. I was able to tell those high schoolers about how my mom went on to connect with other women who had gone through similar experiences to hers. She worked with a nonprofit, and for about 8 years, she talked with women, she helped women as they went through some of the most difficult times of their lives. She was able to be on the phone with them after some of the most difficult calls, after some of the most difficult appointments they had ever had. And sometimes the only words that she would have would be "me too." My wife, Caitlin, and I were on a walk recently, and she made a very thoughtful point. She said, up until now, you and I could basically say that we've gotten everything we wanted. We both got into our top college choice, our top graduate college of choice, and we got the first house that we ever put an offer in on. And we both have jobs that we love. And she was absolutely right. Up until recently, both of us had maybe gotten a little taste of what mourning meant. But we had never had a loss that brought us down to our knees day after day after day. And the reason she said "up until now" when referring to us getting everything that we wanted was that on that walk, Caitlin and I were reflecting on how we had lost our first baby. Caitlin and I found out that we were pregnant in the later part of 2019, and we were ecstatic. She was good at being cautious and knowing that the first 12 weeks of pregnancy can be tricky, but I was not. I was ready to go out and buy baby clothes and toys almost immediately. At the 8.5-week mark, we finally let ourselves get excited, and we went out and we bought a onesie and a little stuffed elephant for our future baby. We had gotten many ultrasounds, and everything was looking great. But at the 12-week appointment, we found out that our baby had stopped growing and that the heart was no longer beating. And that would begin what would become the most hardest days of our lives, the most hardest months, the most hardest weeks. It was in that time that we experienced deep and profound mourning And through it all, there were a lot of people who said and tried to say very nice things to us. But as I'm sure many of you have experienced as well in your lives, often people try to say the right thing, and it just so often ends up making the wounds sting even more. Caitlin and I can say without a doubt that the most powerful, the most comforting, the most important words that we heard were us too. We sat across from Nathan and Julie in their home, and they told us about their story, and they said, us too. Caitlin talked with her mom, and she talked with my mom, and her friends from grad school, and friend from college, and her friend from work, and all of them were able to say, me too. Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted, but I also believe the inverse is true. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforters. There is no silver lining, no answer to why. We haven't found any reassurance, any purpose, or any meaning. But what we have found is that when it seems like there's none of those answers, what we still have are those who love us, those who care, and especially those who understand. And in them we have found comfort. I feel like this is plainly obvious in the text here, in this part of Matthew that we're reading. And so please forgive me if it's something that you've already realized and that I'm just now bringing to your attention. But it took me hours of reading the text and hours of trying to get ready for this sermon to finally realize it. I'm pretty sure that Jesus here gives in the Beatitudes his list of how he lived his life. Jesus found himself at the end of his rope, subjecting himself to great pain when he could have been the one holding the power. Jesus was meek and humble even when he was speaking to the forgotten and the detested. Jesus hungered and he thirsted for righteousness unlike anyone in history. Jesus showed the repentant his mercy. His intentions were always pure. Jesus sought peace through nonviolence instead of the sword. Jesus, above all others, was persecuted because of righteousness. And Jesus, just like the rest of us, mourned and wept and was broken. I believe there's one more thing, though, that displays the blessedness of those who mourn. Those who mourn are those who recognize that the world is not as it should be. This is something that we say every week here at the Sacred Grace. We say it in our prayers of the people at the beginning of the service, saying that the world is not as it should be, as we lament. And we say at the end of our service, saying that the world and ourselves are both not as they should be. Let's be honest, though. When we pray that the institutions, the systems, and the laws that push people down and hold people back, when we say that those things are part of what make the world not as it should be, that can be a pretty dangerous thing to pray. Often those who end up fighting and praying against institutions, systems, and laws are often those who end up finding themselves public enemy number one. And there are a lot of people that I could obviously talk about who have began to push back against institutions and systems and laws. But the first person that comes to my mind is Colin Kaepernick. Colin was a professional quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, and he began protesting police brutality in 2016 by sitting and then eventually kneeling during the national anthem before NFL football games. People around the country were able to mourn the deaths of Michael Brown, Philando Castile, and Alton Sterling. But when he went onto that field and he knelt and he made what he was doing known, that he was fighting against the institutions, systems, and laws that were pushing people down and holding people back, that's when he ended up becoming the public enemy number one of our country. When asked why he began this protest before football games, Colin responded with this: "To me, this is bigger than football, and it would be selfish on my part to look the other way. There are bodies in the street and people getting paid leave and getting away with murder." Colin saw that things are not as they should be, and he began to protest publicly against the systems, institutions, and laws that were holding people down and that were putting people back. Since Colin began his protest, he never received another contract from the NFL. He ended up being the best quarterback to not receive a contract from an NFL football team. Does this seem like someone who is blessed? No. But he never once ended up coming out publicly and bemoaning his fate. Instead, he continued to stand for those who did not have a voice. He began to stand for those who were not able to stand up for themselves. When speaking about what guided his actions of protest, Collins said this: "Seeking the truth, finding the truth, telling the truth, and living the truth has been and will always be what guides my actions." And so I see this. Blessed are those who mourn, for they proclaim the truth, that the world is not as it should be. To say that the world is not as it should be is some of the most powerful mourning that we can do. And it points to the truer reality that is not often seen. To say that the world is not as it should be means God didn't desire this, God didn't plan this, and God did not sanction this. There was one more thing that Nathan told me that evening as we sat sharing stories and sharing our mourning and sharing cocktails. He told me this: God is just as angry as you are. And to all of you, I say the same. God is just as angry, God is just as heartbroken, and God is just as sad as you are. And he loves you.